And we're live. Welcome to CAD Live. I think this is episode number 57 on the 29th of December. And I'm joined today by none other than Mr. Ryan Christensen, otherwise known as Hypnosis for Men. Ryan, season's greetings. How are you doing?
I'm doing quite well. Yeah, just got back home last Sunday. Went back to the Midwest to visit family for the holidays. Had a great time doing that. Got to go down to my uncle's ranch and shoot a bunch of stuff. Had the kids out. Everybody was shooting. It was a great old time. Went out and did Hot Dude Con with John actually the weekend before out in LA. That was a great time being able to sit down and meet all the guys in person. Don't get to do that enough these days. Had a nice little house party going. Some amazing barbecue. It was a great time. How about you?
Excellent.
What'd you end up doing?
Well, I'm in London, which, as you know, is somewhat locked down at the moment. So there's a number of restrictions going on, but I'm here at my girl's place and we've had a pretty good time. Pretty quiet, but we got some great food in, had some great turkey, great roast dinner on Christmas Day, all of the trimming. So yeah, it's been a good time under the circumstances, but it's great to get you on here now, just in case there are people watching. And if you're watching this live, welcome. And please, any questions that you got on mindset, dating, anything else, stick them in the chat and we'll get to them. And anybody watching this on the replay, thanks for tuning in. Very much appreciated. Hope you get a load of value from this, which I know you're going to. So, Ryan, for those people who don't perhaps know you and your work, did you want to just do a little intro and tell them, what where you're coming from and what your work is?
Sure. So my name is Ryan Christensen. I'm in my mid-40s. I'm a guy living in the metropolitan DC area on the East Coast of the United States. I spent 23 years doing military and intelligence work, serving my country in a variety of ways, both in the military and as a contractor afterwards. I got involved kind of in this space mostly last year in 2019. After my second divorce in 2018, I realized I hadn't really done any sort of dating outside of my social circle game, and my social circle wasn't the one I wanted to date in anymore. So I had to figure out that whole dating thing again from scratch in my mid-40s after two divorces. That's how I kind of stumbled across Rich Cooper, and then from there to John from Modern Life Dating, you, Brian Stone, the whole Rule Zero crew. And I got started with body language mastery in Q3 of 2019. Realized exactly how bad off I was. That was a very eye-opening experience. Got the shit kicked out of me, quite frankly. But it's through that I actually got exposed to hypnosis, because there's another guy in the group named Ryan Fowler. Did a session with him, got rid of a lot of baggage, and it really kind of opened my eyes to the potential of hypnosis and the importance of doing mindset work. Because having gotten rid of that baggage, it just created so much space for me to just take action and do the things I needed to do in order to be successful in the dating market. And not long after that, just a few weeks later, I met the girl I'm dating now, who was half my age, gorgeous young lady, and we've been together ever since. So obviously this works. And it was a great time in my life too, because I was already kind of looking at what I wanted to do next, because I've been doing, the intel work for like 20 something years. It was time for something new, because I was up in the project management, customer relations space instead of doing the really cool, fun stuff anymore. So it's time to move on. And I had thought about actually going and getting a degree in psychology. But after getting this exposure to hypnosis, I realized, well, I get certified as a hypnotist in just a couple hundred hours of work. So I give that a try and see if I actually liked working with clients and see if that's something I really wanted to do with my life. Started doing that and realized I was actually pretty good at it. And I really enjoy this kind of work. And I've been getting some great results with guys since the middle of 2020, and decided to leave my old job and do this full time beginning of October. It's been a great time ever since.
Wow. That's fantastic. That's a really inspirational story, actually, for many aspects. I mean, look, obviously, you're a guy who's been through two marriages, which in itself is you probably deserve some sort of award for that. But the fact that you've done what many people in this space want to do, really, which is you've seen an opportunity, and you've taken yourself from the work that you were doing before into something new and something really rewarding, which is great. And also, of course, most importantly, you're helping guys. So, I mean, fantastic stuff, and all props to you. But I mean, so there's so much to unpick here. There's so many ways we could go into this, really. But I suppose the first thing, it seems to me, because people who haven't been on my course, Charisma and Dating Academy, Ryan is a regular. Ryan actually came on the Charisma and Dating Academy course back, I think, the first quarter that we launched. And since then, Ryan has come back and he actually helps out in the webinar sessions, tutoring the guys, helping guys with the mindset stuff, and so on and so forth. And he's an amazing asset. And I've said to him many times that thanks ever so much for doing all of that and being on board. But I think one of the things that we come up with a lot is you'll get guys who come to a course like mine, or they'll go to John, Modern Life Dating, or to whoever, and the first thing is they want to improve their dating life. They want to either get more girls, or they want to get high quality girls, or they want to get into a relationship, or whatever it is. And there are obviously many things that we can teach them, but a lot of the time it comes down to, or there's a big element of them having some sort of trauma or something that's holding them back internally. And that's really where you come in, isn't it, in terms of what you're able to offer?
Man, so there's so much to unpack from that. So, well, first of all, number one, thank you so much for including me in the webinars. I really appreciate the chance to help out. And I'm always happy to help guys like you that are doing serious work for the guys out there. Your material is amazing. And one of the things that I really love about your story in particular is that, unlike somebody like John from Modern Life Dating, who's very much natural, always been that charismatic, outgoing guy, never really had trouble getting girls, and he's just made that successful in a number of ways ever since then, right? Trying to systematize it, got all the tricks of the trade down and everything else, and really made it amazing. But for you, the story of your transformation from a guy who was that shy guy, was that very introverted, insecure guy, meant through that transformation through means which probably not necessarily the best, but having that stuff unlocked and done all the hard mindset work, you're now successful in a lot of ways with women and in your career, because you're doing this full time yourself in ways that guys normally don't see. And that transformation, and having overcome those barriers, having overcome all those difficulties, having overcome all those mindset issues, gives you a unique perspective in the space that I don't think gets replicated nearly enough. Yeah, Ryan Stone's phenomenal on the relationship game stuff, but he never really had much problem after he figured it out, right? He's kind of like one of those charismatic, outgoing guys, right? But you've got that unique story, and that's one of the things I love.
Yeah, thank you very much. I mean, I think it's just important to share this stuff with guys. And as I've gone on as a content creator, I've become more comfortable, I suppose, being vulnerable about that stuff. I mean, to be honest, I was always writing about it. I used to write a lot of blogs about this stuff and so on. And there's a lot of stuff in the books that I produce and things. But actually talking about it on camera is something I've become increasingly confident with, I suppose, over the last year or so. But I think it's valuable because, you're right. I mean, it's all very well for a guy to say, I was always kind of a natural, and this is how it was always like this for me. But I think for many of us, we do come from that different starting point. And I think it's useful for guys to see that can be overcome. So, but here's the thing. You get guys who come to this space and they on the one hand, they're like, okay, so I want to go out, I'm going to do 100 approaches, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. But there's something else underlying it. There's some sort of childhood trauma. What would you say to a dude who's in that situation? Should he walk before he can run with the game stuff, or where'd you go from there?
So there's oh man. To me, unfucking your mind is probably the single fastest way to improve. Because a lot of guys come to these spaces looking for the magic words, right? They want that magic incantation note. They walk up to the girl, they say the magic words, and they fall in love, and they live happily ever after, right? They want that. They look at it from a mechanistic sort of standpoint of, I have a problem, I'm looking for a solution, give me the magic words to say.
Yeah.
And a lot of guys will come in the space and they'll start realizing very quickly, okay, there's more work that I have to do. I got to get my style right. I got to actually get decent photos for the online profile so that I can actually get matches and so forth and so on. There's the mystery method. There's a London day game model, right? They give them frameworks for the conversations themselves, right? So it's not just walk up and say the incantation. But beyond that, a lot of guys would be just fine and be able to implement all that stuff and do it quite naturally if they were able to get out of their own way and get out of their own heads.
Yeah.
A lot of times people have these things going on in their head, whether that's a childhood trauma, whether that's just bad habits, whether that's a poor self-image, whether that's just whatever mechanism is in the back of their head screwing them up, that kind of holds them back. Right?
Yeah.
Now I'll give a good example. There's one guy that I did a session with, man. I'll never forget this. He's great. Irish dude in his 40s, good looking, charismatic, had those, baby blue eyes, that bright smile. It's like, you should be slaying. And he was fine when it came to, like, he just got out of a relationship with a BPD woman that he'd been married to for several years. He, did strippers and things like that.
Yeah.
But the reason he came to me, because he noticed he's like walking in the park and walking down the street, and he sees women, good looking women very normal, very, healthy looking women, look at him and smile and give him all those indicators of interest. And instead of going up and approaching, he'd look down, look away, and walk off.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So when faced with somebody who was interested, was attractive, was well balanced, seemed pretty normal, he'd run. Well, it turned out that there was a part of him, he grew up in kind of a low-class Irish neighborhood. So very much the trailer park, train wreck, Jerry Springer special sort of background, right? Yeah. And with all the problems that kind of come from that. I'd done a lot of work, been to therapy for several years and kind of overcome a lot of that. But he still had this belief in the back of his head that because of the background he came from, he was fundamentally broken and unworthy.
Yeah.
And he still had that belief, even having gone to therapy for years, even having a decent job, even having been married, even having success with women in some areas. Well, did a little bit of work and said, hey, look, you got guys who've like broken their leg, for example, right? And they're gimping around in crutches and a cast for a while, and then the cast comes off, and then they got to do a lot of work to get back on their feet. But after a while, they're fine, right? Because it's healed and they're better now. He's like, well, yeah. So you've done all this work to unfuck that stuff from your past, right? Yeah. You were broken back then. It's like, oh, yeah. But you've done the work to heal it, right? Yeah. Well, if you're healed, then you're not broken anymore, are you? It's like, oh. And if you're not broken, you get to have good things in your life now, don't you?
Yeah.
Oh. And it's that realization of he'd actually done the work and he'd overcome that stuff. And therefore, it was okay to allow himself to have good things in life was the switch that needed to be flipped for him so he could go out and approach these girls. And he was out slaying it the next day.
Wow. So, and this is the thing we've talked about before, is that with hypnotherapy as a therapeutic tool in particular, there is this possibility for very quick results. Because I think one of the things that puts people off therapy, for example, is that you think, oh, I'm going to be lying on a couch for 10 years talking to some guy about my problems. And is that actually going to lead to any tangible benefit?
Yeah. So a couple of things I'll say. Number one, I've been through therapy myself. I had a major depressive episode back in 2009 or 2010, one of the two. And that just kind of fucking broke me. And I needed, several months of therapy to put myself back together. And I did another couple of years worth of work to integrate different parts of my life because I felt very fragmented between, the job that I did, I can't tell anybody about that. And I got this whole kink and BDSM and swinging thing that I was doing that I couldn't tell anybody about. And I had the geek side of myself. And there was all these different facets of myself that didn't really mesh well. So I had to do several years worth of work. And that was incredibly valuable, incredibly important work that I needed to do. So it has value. But you're right. It takes weeks and months and sometimes years to work through that. Yeah. Now in hypnosis, we've got something that we call the critical factor. And it's kind of the barrier between the conscious and the unconscious mind, where your unconscious mind simply won't accept anything as true that's too far different from what it already believes. Okay. Right. It's that judgment filter, right? Kind of the world's best BS filter. Now with hypnosis, and I'm kind of speeding through things a little bit, but hypnosis is an altered mental state where you're incredibly relaxed, incredibly focused, and you suspend judgment. So that barrier, that critical factor kind of goes away. You bypass that. So you're able to get back into your unconscious mind and actually deal with beliefs and behaviors on that level, where instead of automatically rejecting anything that's too far different, you actually get to walk yourself through or walk your client through a process to move them to the place where they want to be on a conscious level, right? Because you can consciously want to be incredibly good with women. The guy that I was talking about earlier, the Irish guy, wanted to be able to approach these girls. He wanted to be able to have healthy, normal relationships. He wanted to be able to date women that weren't total train wrecks on a conscious level. But because that unconscious belief said he wasn't allowed to have it, when there's that conflict between the conscious and the unconscious mind, the unconscious will win 99 times out of 100 because it gets the first vote, right? Yeah.
So do you think self-sabotage is a big problem for a lot of guys then?
Oh, yeah. And quite frankly, self-sabotage and procrastination and approach anxiety and all those different behaviors that you're seeing guys kind of manifest are just ways, they're tactics that your unconscious mind is using to keep you from doing X, Y, or Z.
Yeah. Okay. And how interconnected are they? Because I think obviously the main problem a lot of dudes have is approach anxiety. They're like, there's the attractive girl. I want to go and speak to her, but I'm too afraid to because what if she, tells me to sod off or whatever. But there's something underlying that, isn't there? And a lot of the time, it could be fear of success. It could be actually in many cases. It could be sort of like fear of, well, what if she does stop and she does want to talk to me? Then what do I say? It's things like that. Or it's sort of, I don't know, people will find ways to trip themselves up unnecessarily, right?
Yes, they do. And really, like I said, those are kind of all Your unconscious mind in that situation has a objective. It wants you to not approach that girl. It wants you to not be in a relationship with that girl. So whatever it has to do to keep you from doing that, it will. Maybe it'll have you have a couple too many drinks as you're pre-gaming, so that by the time you go up there, you're sloppy drunk and you make a fool of yourself and get rejected, right?
Yeah.
So even though you got the liquid courage, you've got a little bit too much liquid courage, right? Maybe it decides to just make you so afraid and nervous you never approach. Maybe you go up there and you do the approach well and she gives you her number and then you just never follow up because you're afraid of taking that next step, right? So there's all kinds of different tactics that your unconscious mind can use to prevent you from doing that. So in my work, what I like to do is I like to focus on that end game objective of like, okay, you're not allowing yourself to approach women and not allowing yourself to be in a relationship with women. Let's figure out why it's trying to keep you from doing that.
Yeah.
Or the same thing for like business or anything else, right? Exercise, any number of different things.
Yeah.
I had a problem earlier this year where I wasn't following through with my exercise plans and everything else. And the same thing with like getting started in business. I had a really, really hard time earlier this year getting myself to the point where I actually start doing this stuff.
Right.
Because after doing some work in hypnosis, I realized there's a part of my mind that felt that me putting myself out there in the world like this was inherently dangerous. That if I put myself out there in the world, then I was going to get hurt. All the shit that I love was going to be taken away. So therefore, putting myself out there in the world was dangerous.
Yes.
Well, if I worked out and I got that six-pack abs and I look really good, well, what do? I put myself out there in the world. In order to be successful with business, I have to put myself out there in the world. So it simply didn't allow me to do anything to make progress in those areas because that would result in me putting myself out there in the world. So it wasn't until I did the work to unfuck that I was able to actually start getting better at my diet and exercise, actually start this business up, actually get on, do interviews with John, hop on his general staff, start working with you, start working with Rich Cooper and the other guys. It wasn't until I did that work to get that barrier out of my head that I was allowed myself to put myself out there in the world that I was able to actually do this the way I needed to.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I had a similar thing with dating stuff as well. We'll talk about it in a minute. But the Silver Bishop says, the problem with pickup stuff for me was that it's all about techniques. And now thanks to you, Troy, and Rollo's stuff, I understand the stuff behind it and it feels much more natural. That's true, isn't it? I mean, techniques are great. And I love techniques and we can talk techniques until the cows come home. But in the end, and this is what I try to say all the time with CAD Academy, is that if you don't have that extra special sauce, if you don't have the background stuff sorted out, then it's just not going to work very well, or it's not going to be optimized to you coming across as that attractive, let's say, sex-worthy guy that she's going to want to meet.
How to put that? There's a couple different aspects here. It's kind of like, well, first of all, it's kind of like understanding the rules of the game versus memorizing a set of moves, right? So let's say you're playing chess, right? You can memorize an opening set of moves and then you can memorize a finishing move and you can just mechanically execute that tactic over and over again. But if you don't understand the game, if you don't understand the mechanics and the tactics behind that whole thing, you're never going to be able to properly adapt that to what your opponent does, right? Because the enemy gets a vote, right? So you can mechanically execute your strategy. Sometimes it'll work. Most of the time it won't. The better opponents you go up against you're never going to understand how to modify it appropriately. But if you understand the rules and the logic and all the tactics behind chess, well, then you can then take that standard opening, modify it, and adapt it to the situation on the fly and become far more successful, right? You get to make it your own.
Yeah.
Now, to do that on a pickup and game situation, right? A lot of gays are looking for these techniques and these routines to give themselves something to work with to begin with, right? Brian Stone talks about this a lot, where he used to go through the whole mystery method, right? He's a big mystery method guy, ABC, yada, yada, yada. I don't even remember all the levels, kind of really studied it, but it's just a framework to get you to say stuff while your mind is thinking of what to do next. Yeah. And when you use it in that from that perspective, then everything works really well. It's when you try and use it as a magic incantation of I say the words and then I get laid. That's when it doesn't work, because you don't have any understanding of the underlying mechanics of the underlying game. Yeah. Now, in order to do that, you have to understand yourself. You have to understand what you're wanting. You have to be very in touch with what you need. You have to be in touch with who you are so you can modify it in such a way that you're actually connecting with women and actually building rapport and actually building a connection. And you can't do that if you're fake. Yeah, exactly. And this, as you know, is really what I'm
teaching, and again, this isn't a big plug for CAD Academy because it's closed.
Right.
It's not opening again for ages. But this is what I teach in that material in CAD Academy.
Absolutely.
Because, so all right, here's the thing. Let me explain. I think there were two big changes that happened for me with this stuff. So I'll talk through them briefly so that the audience knows. And then I suppose what would be interesting would be for you to comment on it, but also to say whether you think that these can be achieved either via hypnosis or via people working on themselves or whatever, right? So when I was, a young guy, when I was a teenager, whatever, hopeless with girls, hopeless socially generally, no traction, and it wasn't particularly because I was not great looking or anything else. I was okay looking. That wasn't the problem. It wasn't really any of that stuff. It was all to do with the way that I viewed myself and the way that I came across. Okay. So I had no traction. I mean, I did have some traction with some girls, but the cute girl in the high school that I wanted to date or whatever, she would, she'd be dating the football jock and, all of that kind of classic stuff. Anyway, then when I was around, it was in my early 20s, I had this kind of mental shift, and a lot of it, as I've said, was connected with, drinking too much and doing too many party, naughty things at nightclubs and so on and so forth. But I had this kind of mental shift whereby I was just like, listen, I just don't care anymore. I don't care what people think of me. I'm just going to act however the hell I want to act in these social environments, and probably people are just going to hate me, but so what? I'm just going to be, I'm just going to put it all out there. And what happened from that, and actually that resulted in me becoming quite cocky, quite funny, a little bit jerk-like. And what happened as a result of that was that I broke the invisible barrier, and then I started dating, and I started to get girlfriends, etc., etc. So that was the first thing, and then I carried on with that for a number of years, and then I learned more about game and techniques and so on and so forth. And when that happened, it started to get a bit more systemized. So there was, I mean, you can never say 100% that you're going to be successful on a given night or whatever, but I could be fairly sure that I would go out and I would meet somebody and I would have some traction, because I kind of knew what I was going to be saying and everything else. But there was also a lot of internal sadness that I was carrying around with me. There was just this weight that was dragging me down. And as I've explained in some of the webinars, I actually then began to see a therapist to address some of those things. And it was childhood trauma stuff, family stuff, all this stuff that had been buried for a long time. But it was weird because I would be in the bar or the club, I'd be talking to somebody, having a conversation and trying to be all light and funny and whatever. But deep down, I would have that feeling of that weight, that feeling of sadness. Then I did the therapy, and slowly over time, it actually started to dissipate. And I actually did come out the other side where, generally speaking, and it's not because I'm walking around like, with my hands in the air partying the whole time. I mean, absolutely not, especially in 2020. But generally speaking, I feel like I have dealt with a lot of that stuff so that at least it's now at a level where, I can now be really authentic in those social interactions or those, dating interactions or whatever. So there's two sort of distinct points there, I think. So what's your thoughts on that? Do you think this is something that you can help guys with, either of those or both of those in their own journey?
So your story sounds very similar to mine. My awakening to being successful with women wasn't through the drinking, the partying scene. Basically, my first girlfriend was actually a girl in high school who thought that I was going to be successful later in life and decided to lock me down quick.
Right.
So I didn't even choose that, right? And everything else since then, until I got into later on in life, was very much just kind of happenstance or meeting girls through friends, right? And having that social proof through that. After I went away to college, I actually didn't get laid for like 2 years. After having girlfriends all throughout high school, once I got to college, everything kind of fell apart because I didn't have the social circle. I didn't have anything else. And I kind of went back to that same introverted space that I was. I was the geek. I was the computer gamer. I played Dungeons and Dragons all the time, right? I was that guy. After I decided to run away from the Midwest and Kansas to get the hell out of there in order to save myself from a life of boredom and everything else, I joined the Marine Corps.
Yeah.
Right? That was my way out. And that as an experience will change you, period. It does. Yeah. Going through that experience flat out changes you, makes you a different guy. Well, the first place I went to after boot camp was Monterey, California for language school, where you have all 4 services, learning languages. I was a Russian linguist at the time. So you're there with everybody else who's just out of boot camp. So it's basically freshman year of college all over again with no parents. And the Marines are kind of top of the social order in that space. We've got the discipline, we've got the mystique and everything else. So all of a sudden I walk into a space with essentially a bunch of horny freshman college girls. Top of the walk, we're the frat party, we're the jocks. By default, right? So I was very successful there and ended up getting married the first time through that. Married a girl in the Air Force, right? But the thing is that I hadn't internalized that as part of who I was in terms of actually being attracted to women, right? It wasn't until after I got divorced the first time, moved out to DC and got in the BDSM scene that I kind of had that cachet again, where I was an attractive guy, fairly in shape, in a scene where that was not very common. I was a guy that had social acuity, had some social skills, wasn't a jackass because I was raised as a gentleman in the Midwest, right? I had things like manners, which is not necessarily common in that scene. And as a result, it was very easy for me, right? But again, I still hadn't done a lot of the work to let go of a lot of the trauma. And it wasn't until I got out of that second divorce, after I got out of the BDSM scene, after I walked away from the swinging scene, that I had to sit back and realize that, oh shit, I don't have any of the skills, any of the mindset work that I need to be successful outside of that space. And that space does not have the kind of women that I want to be with anymore. So at that point, I had to do the hard work to do exactly what you're talking about, let go of some of that childhood crap, get rid of some of that baggage. But once you do that, it creates so much space for you to do the things you already know you should be doing. Now, you can do that through therapy in some ways, but that takes a lot of time. I'd guess it probably took a couple of years to get to where you were wanting to be with therapy. Just because with that critical factor piece, right, you kind of have to walk that window close to the shift that you want to make before you can actually make that jump. And that takes time, right? It works, but it takes time. For hypnosis, what I like to say is, to people who've done therapy or have a background in psychology, like I get to buy 6 months of rapport in 5 minutes by getting you into hypnosis, because we straight up just bridge into your unconscious mind. I can ask whatever the fuck I want, get all the answers I need, and we've suspended judgment. So all those normal defenses you have in therapy of not wanting to talk about stuff, about being embarrassed about things, all that shit's just gone. So I get to buy 6 months of rapport in 5 minutes by getting in hypnosis. And then we get to do a year's worth of work in an hour. Because again, I get to ask whatever questions I want. I get to have you show me whatever we need to see to understand the actual problem that your unconscious mind is trying to solve by doing X, Y, or Z. And then because that judgment is suspended, we get to change those behaviors and beliefs down on that level. I get to walk you through that change, and then we get to do some work to kind of lock it in and make it permanent. So you can do a year and a half worth of work in an hour and a half easy.
I mean, it's always seemed to me to be that way, that it's a short circuit, or it's a short way to get through to the motherboard very quickly without having to sort of go through all the shit first. I suppose the process that I was describing for myself, in a sense, you've got, I think phase one was a mental breakthrough of sorts, and it was, but it was really about learning to act in a certain way. It was learning to act like the cocky jerk boy kind of guy. And that was useful in itself. But in order to sort of complete the journey, I then had to clear away the baggage underneath. I had to get rid of the real negative feelings underneath.
So basically in phase one, you realized that it was possible for you.
Yes.
In phase two, you actually made it a reality for yourself and became the kind of man who was that guy, right? Because it's very easy to act like you're successful. It's very easy to act like you're charismatic. It's very easy to act like you're, outgoing and having fun and happy, yada, yada, yada. Some people need some substances to get them there. Other people don't. But acting that way and being that way are two different things. It's a difference between being red pill aware and having read Rollo Tomasi, right? Having read the Unplugged Alpha, having read your books, and actually internalized those lessons and made it part of who you are, right? Rollo likes to say, I don't have to try and game, I am the game, because he's internalized all that knowledge from his books, right? Well, he wrote the damn things he has to. But once you make it part of who you are, once you step into that identity and actually fully embody it, fully become that man, then that is who you are. It's natural at that point.
What about this thing about guys being too nice then, and then, you know, breaking through to becoming, I mean, firstly, what do you think about nice guy syndrome? I know that we always make this argument that actually nice guys aren't really nice, and et cetera, et cetera. But where do you think it comes from, and how can guys break out of it?
Ooh, so this will be an interesting story. So number one, I am a nice guy. That's exactly how I was raised. You know, middle class, Midwest, Catholic, white boy, like opening doors for girls, saying yes sir, no ma'am, all that kind of jazz. That's how I was raised. Always was. That's just how things were back then, right? But what I've realized since then, and even in the BDSM scene, so part of the reason why I got into BDSM, you know, I'd always been kind of interested in it, but I always had a lot of difficulty with the idea of spanking girls and choking them and slapping them and all that fun stuff that you do these days. It wasn't until I was in my mid-20s, I was going through school again for Intel for the Air Force, and I was playing a game called EVE Online. It's a multiplayer online game, space-based, right? One of the people that I played with was a girl who was like a hardcore masochist, hardcore into BDSM, had done some crazy ass shit.
Yeah.
So I started talking to her, and she was talking about how doing that kind of stuff was so liberating and freeing for her, how it was hard for her to let go of things on her own, how it was hard for her to, you know, kind of relax and everything else, you know, hard for her to kind of cope with stuff unless she had that external punishment, that external release. And it was at that point that I realized that it wasn't something, you know, BDSM wasn't necessarily something I was doing to someone else, right? I wasn't imposing this or inflicting this on somebody else.
Yeah.
It was a need that they had that I was fulfilling, right? So even in that space, it's now okay for me to want this because girls need it, or because girls want this. So it's okay for me to want this too, right? And that's how I was able to allow myself to get into BDSM. So I was even getting into BDSM and from a nice guy frame, right? And it took a long time. It wasn't until after my second divorce that it really clicked for me in a really big way how much I was sacrificing myself and my own needs for others, sacrificing my own wants and desires for others, putting everybody else's needs first. And it wasn't until after I pulled the trigger on that second divorce, because I initiated both of them. Once I realized, you know, we had having these big fights about everything, and I finally just slid down the law. It's like, look, you either have to be on board or we're done. And after about a month, she said, look, I can't be the woman you need me to be. I'm like, I appreciate that. Thank you for your honesty. There's the door.
Okay. Yeah.
And it was at that point that I realized that I couldn't do that anymore. It was that point that I realized that setting yourself on fire to keep others warm is not a tactic that's going to work, period. Because even having done that for years, because we were together for close to 7 years, I still never got what I needed. Right. It's just fundamentally a project that flat out doesn't, you know, it's a tactic that flat out does not work. Right. And that's the big thing, is that I don't think that it's that nice guys are disingenuous or they're not nice. It's just that they're doing a tactic that doesn't work because they're expecting reciprocity from people who don't necessarily have the capacity for it. Because one thing that nice guys do is they seek out people who are needy, because those are the kind of people that are going to accept what they have to offer the easiest. Right.
Okay. Yeah.
People who are very secure and don't need people to do things for them get turned off by that kind of needy giving. Right. Because part of the whole nice guy tactic is, let me be whatever you need me to be so that you'll accept me as who I am. Whereas somebody who is fairly centered, fairly well put together, fairly mentally healthy, right? They don't need somebody to be somebody else for them. Yeah. It's like, no, I think I've got this shit covered. I don't need you to be X, Y, and Z. I need somebody who is a complement to me on their own, who brings new stuff to the relationship, rather than me telling them how to fill holes and gaps in the relationship or the structure. Right.
Yeah. I mean, what about right at the beginning as well? Because I think that this is where it trips up a lot of guys. You know, they first meet the girl and they are either over message or on the first date or whatever it is. They come across as being too needy, but really you need to be in your own frame from the beginning, don't you? From the very first message that you send.
Yeah, well, there's a phrase, and I don't remember who said it in this space, but basically abundance solves most of your problems.
Yeah, true.
Right, because part of the reason why guys get so wrapped up in individual interactions, why they get so caught up in the messaging, why they get so giving and uh, overly needy, overly giving, is because they don't have 100 options on the line, right? It's very easy not to text too much if you've got dozens of women you're texting, or if you know that you can go out and get 20 new numbers in a week if you really want to, right? It's very easy to be detached from that kind of things when you've got other things going on in your life, right? If you're a busy man who's on his mission, creating his business empire and writing and traveling the world and doing cool shit, then girls are kind of an afterthought in a lot of ways. You don't have time to be sitting there writing 87 text messages back and forth. Right?
Yeah.
So a lot of times these guys don't have a lot of options. They don't believe they have a lot of options, even if they might, right? Because a lot of times you'll be blind to the options you do have, or they don't have a whole lot going on in their life. So they overinvest in every single interaction. They overly obsess about every single interaction. And they get wrapped up in all these minutiae. It's like, if you just step back, did something cool with your life, and then just allowed the interaction to go the way it's going to go, then you're probably going to get better results. One thing I like to tell guys these days is that until you sit down next to them at the coffee shop or the bar, they're not real. Right? They're just words on a freaking page. It's photos on a dating profile that you don't even know if it's them. I mean, it's text back and forth, and you just don't. They're not real until they sit down with you, right? And
that's very true. That's very true. I mean, we are men of a certain vintage, Ryan, and obviously this year in particular, there's been a lot of talk about the dating apps, and I mean, I've got no issue with the dating apps. I think guys should be on them. I think it's a great funnel. It's a great way to meet people for sure, but there are downsides to this as well, right? And do you think that guys getting this can fall in, particularly inexperienced guys, they can get catfish. They can almost fall into this thing of like, oh my god, we're in love because she sent me 17 messages, and it's like you say, it's very ephemeral until you've actually met up and in person and sat down and had that interaction.
Well, what tends to happen is guys will create a picture in their head of the woman that they're talking to, and especially if it's a guy who's fairly inexperienced or hasn't had a lot of dating success, they put all their expectations or hopes or fears or dreams on this mental image of this individual, right?
Yeah.
So they're essentially starting a relationship with a fantasy they built in their head.
Yeah.
Right. And they're judging everything from that perspective. So the worst part is you sit there and you finally meet up and you realize that the person across from you, sitting across from you at the drinks table is, I don't know, human with flaws and have their own personality, and don't really feel like fitting this perfect fantasy model that you had in your head, and you get disappointed, right? Or you start trying to make them into the fantasy model you've built in their head, which, just trust me from experience, it doesn't work very well when you try and do that, right? The attitude that I like to take, and the attitude that I suggest most guys take, is that you are giving them the opportunity to show you who they are so that you can decide whether or not they deserve a place in your life.
Yeah.
You get to decide whether they deserve any of your time and attention. Because until they earn that spot, until they show you that they actually deserve it, right? Until they show you that they actually have something to offer, there's nothing there.
Yeah.
So everything that you do, from matching with them online to texting them, up until you actually sit down with them on that first date, should exist just to get them to that date. Because that is the point where you actually get to know who they are. Which is why day game and things like that are so much more effective in terms of actually building a solid relationship from the start, whether that's a day, a week, a month, a year, because at least then you're actually interacting with the person in person.
Yes.
You get to see all the body language. You can actually build rapport. You actually see how the different things are hitting and how they're not, right?
Yeah.
So online dating is phenomenal for expanding your net, expanding your number of options, right? A lot of these girls that I've messaged with online, I would have never met in person.
Yeah.
Never come across with in day game. Yeah, and I'm a homebody by nature, so day game's not my forte, right? But it has this downside of you invest in a mirage, in a fantasy.
Yeah.
And until you learn how to step back from that and just recognize that the entire purpose of everything you're doing is just to get them to sit next to you in a bar so that you can figure out who they actually are, then it can be kind of difficult. It can be very easy to trip yourself up.
Yeah, definitely. Because guys can get caught up in fantasy a lot, can't they? In terms of thinking that there's something more happening here than is actually happening.
And again, it comes down to that desire and that need for connection, that desire and that need for sex in a relationship, right?
Yeah.
You have this unmet need, this unfulfilled thing, which is one of the most powerful drives people have, especially for guys. And as soon as you have an opportunity or a perceived opportunity to fulfill that, if you don't feel like you have many options, if you're coming from a scarcity mindset, if you're coming from a place of insecurity and lack and need, then it's very easy to invest all of your all of that attention, all of that need, all of that desire on that one opportunity, right? Because you don't think you got anything else. So you have to make that one work because you have no other options. This is your only chance to fulfill this incredibly powerful need, except it's not.
Yes. Well, so here's the thing, right? What do you say to the guy who's living in a small town somewhere in America, and even worse, there's restrictions, so you can't even travel and blah, blah, blah. Because like I and John and many of us will say, well, listen, there's all this abundance and blah, blah, blah. And of course there is, but some people are in these circumstances where it's very difficult to take advantage of that. So what should that guy do?
Well, I would say a couple of things. I'd say number one, for everything there is a season, right? And that, okay, so you're in a situation where you're stuck in a small town, everything's restricted, you can't really go out and date. There's like 6 girls in the whole town, 5 of them are married, and the other one has been run through by everybody there, right? Options are limited. Fair enough. Okay, cool. So that means that at this point in time, dating cannot be your priority because you have no real good options to fulfill that. Fair enough. Focus on other shit. Focus on your money and your muscles. Focus on getting your body right, getting your mind right, doing fucking interesting things so you've got interesting stories to tell. Right? Again, one of the things that trips up a lot of these guys that are new to the dating market and don't have a lot of success is that they don't have a lot of interesting things going on in their lives. If the most interesting thing you have going on in your life is going to Cat Academy webinars and watching us on YouTube, that's a problem. Not like you shouldn't be doing this, because this is a great way to get information on how to change your life and how to make your life better. But you actually have to have interesting things going on. You have to actually be doing cool shit. That's the kind of thing that kind of hooks women and keeps them in, is that you're actually living an interesting life. And oh, by the way, when you're living an interesting life, you stop stressing so much about the shit you don't have, because you're living an interesting life. You've got stuff going on. If you've got stuff going on, you don't have time to sit down and think and stew in your own bullshit so much.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're right. There's 2 things going on here. There's the pandemic, which has obviously thrown everything into a loop this year and probably going into next year. So that's one thing. But if we could, put that aside as being temporary, then you've got the dude who's living in the small town, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, in the end, is there any excuse for not just finding ways to mobilize yourself? I mean, ultimately, is it just as simple as to say, listen, there's a big world out there. There are many ways now to make money that you don't have to be in one location. You can work, you can travel. Is there any excuse not to just be like, listen, Matt, if you really want this enough, you've got to get out of your location and just start to find new opportunities elsewhere?
How to put it? There are any number of excuses and any number of reasons not to go down that road. But if you accept any of those excuses, if you choose not to go down that road, then you're not going to be successful and won't have the things you want. Right? I think that if nothing else, this pandemic has been phenomenal at tearing the blinders and the blindfolds off of people and showing them how the world actually is, right? In terms of security, in terms of opportunity, in terms of what can be done, in terms of what you can do as an individual, right? A lot of people gave up. A lot of people have given up, and that's okay. Some people just can't make that mental shift, and that's fine. But if you're on YouTube channels like this, if you're watching content like this, you're probably not that guy, or at least you don't want to be that kind of guy. If that's the case, you look at guys who have made it big during the pandemic, like me. I started a business from scratch, from zero, and got it to the point where I could quit my 6-figure job and do this full time during the pandemic. And oh, by the way, I've done everything virtually. I have done every single session with every single client I've worked with has been over Zoom.
Amazing.
Right. Which
Yeah.
in hypnosis world, like it's always, oh, you got to be in the chair. I got to be able to touch you. You got to be right there. You got to have that proximity. It's like, no, I've done every single one over Zoom. I've worked with guys in fucking Siberia of all places.
Wow.
Swear to God.
Amazing.
So once you start making that mental shift of all the stories you've been told of how things are and how things should be and how things work, once you realize that a lot of that stuff is bullshit, you start going, okay, cool. Now I need to figure out what is, right? Deal with the world as is, not how way that I wish it should be, right? Deal with the world as is, not how I've been told it is, right?
Yeah.
Once you start looking at that, you start realizing, okay, I've been living my life according to a number of rules, according to a number of, stories that don't work for me, that are not going to get me what I want. And once you make that realization, there's the possibility of change.
Yeah.
It's a scary fucking thing. It's an incredibly difficult thing to make that shift sometimes if you've been living in a different way for a long time. But fundamentally, it opens the door. Just like you kind of had the door open for you once you started partying and doing all that other stuff, because those substances forced you to be acting a different way, and you opened the door to recognizing that you could be that kind of guy.
Yeah, right? Exactly. Yeah. And something, sorry to cut you off, but I just wanted to say something you said just then struck me as interesting, which is this idea about the narratives that we tell ourselves. Because I think when I was younger, I had a story about myself, which was very much like, I'm kind of a bookish nerd. I'm the kind of guy who sits in class and, spends all the time writing and all this. And I never thought of myself as being that I could be this other kind of guy. And that turned out to be false. But do you think that a lot of people are living under these false narratives that are actually just self-created and can be broken out of if necessary?
Yeah, one of the things I like to say a lot is that, I don't remember where I heard this phrase. It's another amazing one that's kind of stuck with me. I'm great with aphorisms. I fucking love this stuff. Because a lot of times other people will say things much better than I could have said it myself. But it goes, it's not the things that happen, it's the stories that we tell.
Yeah. Yeah, very true. Very true.
You walk up to a girl and you get rejected. The story could be, oh, I'm worthless. Nobody's going to love me. Obviously, I'm going to be alone forever. Or it could be, obviously, she's blind and doesn't recognize how awesome I am. It sucks to be her.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
Depending upon which one of those stories you tell, you're going to go in one or two very different directions with your dating life. If you think you're fucking awesome and she's just blind, over to the next one. If you think you're worthless and you're going to be alone forever, you're never going to approach again. Right? Same event, different stories.
Yeah.
So as we move through life, we make stories to explain the events that have happened, right? Going back to the Irish guy, for example, right? The story that he was telling himself was that because of the things that had happened to him in his life, he was fundamentally broken and unworthy. He doesn't deserve to have good things because guys like him that grew up in places like that, they don't live good lives.
Yeah.
Right. And that was a story that he told because it made it much easier to deal with the fact that he didn't have a good life. Right? Because, this is just how things are, right? This is just who I am. This is just the way it is. And so therefore that becomes a lot easier to stay in that space.
Yeah.
But it's just a story. It's just an explanation you've made up in your head. It's just something that you've identified, an identity that you have chosen to adopt. Well, if they're just stories, if they're just beliefs, and you can change stories, you can change beliefs. If you can tell a different story about the things that have happened, then you can be a different man.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Very powerful. And a very small example of this, but a very telling example for me was I was always quite interested in clothes, in fashion. I always had an idea of how I wanted to look. And I remember, though, in my early 20s, I would see people wearing these fashionable clothes, see other guys wearing these cool things. And I literally I believed that those clothes were just for these other people over here who were cool. And that I wasn't a cool person. And so therefore I couldn't dress like that because it just wasn't for me. I wasn't one of those people. And then, and it sounds ridiculous to even be saying this, but it was a revelation to me at the time. And then I just had this change of mindset. And I just thought, well, listen, I don't care. I'm just going to wear that stuff anyway. And to hell with the consequences. And of course, what you then discover is that there's no invisible arbiter sitting in the sky going, oh, no, Troy, you can't wear that. I mean, it's just ridiculous, right? You can be who you want to be without sounding cheesy. You can be who you want to be. And really, who's going to stop you? You know, you might get some resistance actually from society, because if you try to raise yourself up, you try to become somebody else, then you do sometimes get that crabs in a bucket thing of people trying to pull you down. But then you need to get yourself away from those people, basically, right?
Yeah. Well, so there's a couple of different pieces of that I absolutely love. And number one is that there's nobody, there's no sky god, sky dad isn't looking down from on high saying you're allowed to do this, you're not allowed to do this, you can have this, but you can't have this thing over here, right? Nobody's telling you that shit. The only person that's telling you that is you.
Yeah.
So if you stop telling yourself that, then in fact you can give yourself the opportunity to have those.
Yeah.
But often it's that story running in the back of your head that you're not allowed, you don't deserve, it's not for you, that keeps you from doing those things that you would need to do to have that. Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
The other thing is that had to do with fitting it. Yeah, the crabs in the bucket thing, right? Jocko Willink is at the Navy SEAL. One of his things is like, something goes wrong. Good. So, people are trying to take you down, drag you back in the bucket. Good. Now you know who to get out of your life. Now you can move on and get better friends. Now you can get friends who actually help you build you up, right? Cool. Every single thing that happens, you can take it as a negative story of, I'm not allowed to have it, or you can take it as a positive lesson of, okay, this shows me the things I need to change to get to where I want to be.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Because taking action creates clarity in every single situation. Just doing something different will give you data and will let you know what is you need to change or what you need to shift in order to get to where you want to be. All you got to do is take action.
Yeah. I think actually some of the characteristics that one needs to be a content creator, somebody who's on YouTube, somebody who's on social media, whatever, right, are similar actually to the things that you need to put yourself forward in dating, because everybody gets, so there's this thing called imposter syndrome that everybody talks about, like, I don't feel like I'm good enough. I don't feel like I should be talking about this. I don't feel like why. And on the other side of that, if say you're a content creator who's talking about dating, like I am, like you are to some extent, like John MLD, you will get a ton of people going, well, why the hell is this bloke talking about that? What rights? Why is he, what makes him an expert? Why does he think he's so great? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You get a lot of that kind of thing, of course, and that comes with the territory. But it's what you do about that counts, because either you're going to allow that to silence you, you're going to allow that to prevent you from having a voice, or you're just going to say, well, okay, some people are going to think that's cool, I'm just going to carry on doing my thing anyway. And in a sense, it seems to be analogous to the dating marketplace, because when I was a young dude and I was going out talking to girls and I would get shot down, it's easy to fall into that trap of thinking, okay, well, she thinks that, so she must be right, and so therefore I'm just going to have to go and live in my basement and do 8-hour life
Cheetos,
and all, et cetera, and
grow tomatoes,
yes, but you don't have to do that, right? You don't have to. You don't have to take the opinions of other random people as something that's going to affect what you do in your life.
Right. Ultimately, it always comes down to your own self-perception, right? They say that perception is reality, but I think it's much more of a self-perception is reality.
Yeah.
This is something that I struggle with a lot myself, and I still kind of am. Talked earlier about that whole problem I was having with being able to put myself out there, right? Okay, well, I got over that enough to be able to start a business, right? But I've got this other thing in the back of my head that I'm still trying to figure out and still trying to get a handle on of, I'm allowed to be like this successful, but not like this successful. Very much of I'm different. So while you obviously can overcome all this stuff and become a very successful content creator, I'm a different guy. And that's not for me. Right. Yeah. Even though I could see somebody else making this massive successful business, I'm not like them. I'm a different kind of guy. So that's not available to me. Right.
Yes.
So even with somebody like me that's had some success, even with me, somebody like me that's able to start a business, we can have this stupid shit in the back of our head that stops us from leveling up to the next thing. Right. Or where we can be successful in one area of your life and not successful in any others. Right. You could be this amazing writer and content creator and being putting out, live streams that have thousands and thousands of adoring fans and still not believe that you're attracted to women.
Yes.
We can create these stupid little arbitrary divisions in our mind of like, yeah, of course I'm good at this. Of course I'm a world famous writer, but nobody actually loves me. They just write, they just love this writing, these creations of mine, but that's not me, right? We can do that so often in so many stupid little ways, but that's okay. Because once you recognize that division and once you recognize it's stupid, you can do the work to take that division down. You can do the work to make that transition, right? Awareness creates opportunity for action, right? Awareness creates opportunity for change.
Do you think that there is actually a kind of connection between imposter syndrome in a career and fear to put oneself out there fully in the dating market? It's a similar sort of thing, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Essentially, in both cases, you're in a position where you don't believe that you're allowed to have the success that you're getting.
Yeah, right? And I think, and actually, right, I think, and I'm just thinking aloud here, so take from this what you will, but I think that can connect with, in many cases, childhood trauma or childhood issues. Because if in your childhood you were somebody who was, I don't know, in a dysfunctional home, or you had a very disciplinarian, authoritarian parent, and that parent was always saying you're not good enough, or you'll never be able to do that, or that kind of experience, then it's very easy to take that on board in later life. And then when somebody comes along and says, your YouTube channel's rubbish, you shouldn't be doing this, or they say you're not attractive, I would never date you, whatever, then you just take that and you're like, oh, right, okay, they're right. I now need to modify my entire life because of that. And of course, actually, what you discover is their opinion has no authority over you unless you allow it to.
Correct. So essentially, up until a certain age, that the whole critical factor I mentioned earlier isn't really a thing, right? You're essentially accepting uncritically and accepting whatever is coming into your head, and that's forming your beliefs. And that kind of gets stuck because as we move through life, our brains are the most amazing pattern matching machines ever created.
Yeah.
So, you run across something in your life that says, you've got this belief that you're a loser, that you don't deserve stuff, right? And so you run across a situation and somebody calls you a loser, and the back of your head says, am I a loser? Yeah, I'm a loser. So therefore that's another reinforcement, right? And it just kind of reinforces and builds itself, right? Myself growing up, I was always very shy. I was always had a difficult time making friends, but I was also really, really good at, I was a fairly intelligent guy. And so I was already really good at school and testing and so forth and so on. Yeah. So I built this belief system throughout my childhood, and it reinforced itself all throughout my college and Marine Corps days and all throughout 45 years of my life, where of course I'm incredibly good at my job. Of course I know how to do all this kind of stuff, but I'm not good with people.
Yeah.
And I'm not popular, and I can't be successful with women, and I'm not charismatic, right? And that just builds itself over time and reinforces itself over time because, again, in any situation, you can tell multiple stories. And so because my unconscious mind has this idea in the back of the head that I can't be popular, that I'm not charismatic and everything else, it's always going to choose a story that reinforces that notion. So until you do the work to go back and change that, you're stuck in that. But again, it's just a story, and you can change the story. Yeah. And when you change the story, you can then move in a different direction. You can adopt a different identity. You can adopt different beliefs. And then you can have yourself reinforce those beliefs.
Yeah, because sorry.
Yeah, so as a result of doing the work with John, working with you, working with Ryan Stone, working with Rich Cooper, like I've gotten a decent amount of success with women in the traditional dating market. I've figured out online dating to a decent degree to where I'm not worried about being single again. Yeah. So I've adopted that as an identity. I've adopted that as part of who I am. So I now know that I'm a guy who's successful with women, and that comes out in every interaction that I have with them because I'm much more relaxed, because I've got that abundance mentality, because I know that through reinforcing that and having done the work, this is a reality for me. This is who I am now, right? Yeah. I'm never necessarily going to be John. Don't necessarily want to be John, but I'm never going to be Ryan. I'm never going to be Myron, right? I'm never going to be that really charismatic, outgoing guy. But that doesn't mean that I can't have success.
Well, you don't have to,
because there's women who, because there's all kinds of women that want all kinds of different things. All I got to figure out is how to put myself out there in such a way that attracts the kind of women that are going to be a good fit for me. Yeah, and as soon as I do that, I'm never going to be single. Never going to have to worry about that. Yeah,
wow. I mean, there's a lot there again. What about fake it to make it then? Because I know we've touched on this before, but for what you were just saying just now, it would suggest to me that you would be of the opinion that faking it to make it can only go so far. But did you want to? Were you able to speak on that a little bit?
So I'm not a fan of the idea of faking it till you make it, because of the idea that it implies that it's not you, or that you're trying to be somebody else. Okay. What I would say is that taking action gets you results. Taking action creates clarity, right? So you always have to put yourself out there and just do the thing to get the feedback you need to actually improve, to actually figure out how to make it work for you, right? Because I'm not John, his system is not going to work 100% for me because I'm not him. But I can take that, go out and do it, see what happens, and then modify it to suit who I am, right? Because he's obviously figured out a way to make shit work. His system works for a reason. All I have to do is figure out how to make that happen by going through the motions and doing it, right? So it's not so much fake it till you make it. It's much more do the work, do the drills, get the skills, right? You go out, you execute it as written to figure out what works and what doesn't. Once you've figured out what works and what doesn't, you then make some changes, do it again, and then do it again, and then do it again. It's a willingness to just shut the hell up and do what somebody else tells you long enough to figure out why it works and why it doesn't, right?
Yeah.
Now, for me, that's a little bit easier because I've done martial arts, which is very much just fucking do this. And then 3 belts later, you figure out why the hell you were doing it. I've been through the Marine Corps, which was 13 weeks of shut the hell up and do what I tell you to, right? I've been through hypnosis training. I've done various initiatory things where it's very much just, you're not going to understand what you're doing while you do it. That's okay. By the time you're done, you'll get what you did. You did. And then once you have that understanding, you can make your own decisions on how you want to move forward from there, right? So it's very much a process of just like, shut the hell up, do what they tell you, execute it as written, and figure out why it's not working the way it works for them. And once you do that, you'll be able to figure out how to make it work for you.
Yeah, for sure. I agree with that. Kazit says, can't do super chat from Thailand, but where do you get started with self-hypnosis or hypnosis? Well, you book a session with Ryan, but I'm not quite sure. I don't know. Could you speak to that question at all? I think I'm not sure if he means doing it as a practitioner. I think he means doing it as a patient, if you like, or as a client.
So if you're interested in working with me to do some hypnosis work, get some of these limiting beliefs out of your mind, make yourself a better guy, get yourself out of your own way so you can do the things you need to do to be successful in life. My website address is actually pinned in the description of the video. It's www.hypnosisformen.net. All you need to do is hop on there. You can book a quick 15-minute call for me so we can work through whatever issue you want to address so that we can figure out the best way forward. You can also just go ahead and book a session from there as well. YouTube has quite a lot of material on hypnosis and self-hypnosis. The thing that I have a problem with, the majority of that is, back up a little bit. In hypnosis, there's 2 main approaches. The first is a very passive approach where you come to me and say you want to stop smoking. So I sit you down, I get you in hypnosis, and I tell you to stop smoking, whether through telling some stories, whether through using metaphor, whether doing some direct suggestion, whatever I need to do, right? But it's very much a passive situation where you sit down, I do the process, you wake up, and then you go about your day. That's essentially kind of like doing affirmations and habit change, but it's kind of on steroids because we're working directly with the unconscious mind. That has a lot of positive results and a lot of success. Okay. You can find recordings on how to do pretty much everything. Be more confident, stop smoking, lose weight, exercise more, all this kind of stuff. The difficulty that I have with things like that is that I'm a highly intelligent guy that I know what they're fucking doing. So if my mind doesn't want to make the change, it's straight up not going to. When you're in hypnosis, I can tell you to do whatever the hell I want to, but I can't make you do anything you don't want to. So if you have some limiting beliefs that are in direct conflict with what we're trying to change, it's just not going to work. The approach that I take is much more interactive and much more invasive isn't the right word, but my approach is to actually go in and figure out why you're doing the thing you're doing. Why you're keeping yourself from changing in the way you want to change. So I'm actually addressing those limiting beliefs. I'm actually addressing the purpose of that behavior, which means that once we change that, you can become the man you want to be much easier. And some of that other stuff, some of the more passive stuff actually works really well after you've made that shift, right? And that's one of the things that's on my agenda for 2021 is actually putting out more of that recorded content, more of that passive content so that you can try this. And if this isn't working, cool, book a session. We'll get the belief out of your way that's holding you up. And then you can go back to that and have amazing success, right? But if you want to try hypnosis, there are a number of resources out there. I don't really have any good ones to list off the top of my head. But just hop on Well, I guess that just means I need to start making more content in that area, doesn't it? If I don't have any good ones to recommend, I got to create it myself, I suppose.
Absolutely. I think the bottom line is that there are, without a doubt, I mean, you just go onto YouTube, do a search for self-hypnosis or hypnosis, you'll find plenty of stuff, but obviously it pays dividends to, and by the way, this isn't a massive puff piece for, selling just solely for the purpose of selling Ryan's stuff, but he is an awesome guy, and it makes sense to work with somebody who is obviously knows what they're doing and knows what they're talking about, but also is sensitive to what we talk about in this space, because this is quite a specific sort of area. We're talking specifically to men. We're talking about men with dating issues and through a certain lens. And I think it's important when you work with somebody, if you really want to get benefit from this, is that you're on the same wavelength with the client, right? Does that make sense? Because you could easily,
absolutely.
You could easily work with a hypnotherapist or indeed a therapist who was very, let's say, blue pill, and that may not get you where you need to be.
Oh yeah, and actually that brings up an amazing point. One thing that people talk about with therapists is like how little results they get with them, and a lot of times it's because they're not choosing a therapist that's actually aligned with their beliefs and values, so they can actually get them where they want to be. Right? If I walk into a therapist's office and it is your typical SJW woman in her 60s who has a certain view of how dating life is going to go, she's not going to help me build multiple relationships at the same time. Not going to happen. Right? She does not have the mind that can comprehend that. Yeah. Part of the reason why I wanted to do hypnosis for men in particular was because a lot of stuff that I was seeing in the hypnosis space was very like woo-woo crystals, positive thinking, you love yourself, yada, yada, yada. And that's not how guys work 9 times out of 10, right? We're just not in that vibe, right? So I wanted something that was much more professional. I also wanted something that did have that perspective from the red pill, right? From the relatomasi, from actually understanding how human nature works, how the interaction between men and women work. Because coming at it from that perspective, I can help guys that want to actually live that kind of life. I can help guys move away from the limiting beliefs that they've been given all their life, so they can actually help sort of internalize these lessons faster and better. Right? So they can actually live more congruent with the beliefs and with the understanding that they now have.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So it really does help to work with Ryan or somebody who is sympathetic to what you actually want to do, the kinds of changes you want to make. Because if you go to, well, like you say, the archetypal hipster-esque sort of therapist, they're perhaps going to be coming at things from a different angle from you, and you're just not going to get where you want to get to. So Akazit's come back with a second. He's booked a 50-minute free call. Great stuff. Perfect. Great decision. And he's saying a follow-up question would be, is this going to be that different from meditation or self-reflection methods?
Yes, very much so. So the experience of hypnosis in terms of the level of relaxation and kind of freedom from extraneous thought is very similar to meditation, except it's much deeper and much more profound. Your mind gets incredibly quiet. The other piece is that you're incredibly focused and you suspend judgment. And even in meditation and self-reflection, you haven't really suspended judgment because you're still working on that conscious level. The entire point of hypnosis and the reason why it's so powerful is that you're actually getting down on the level of your unconscious mind. You're getting down to that level of the subconscious. You're actually putting that part of your mind in the driver's seat, and your normal conscious rational thinking mind kind of fucks off on vacation for a while. Which means that you're actually working with the level of beliefs, behavior, emotion. You're actually working down where your memories are actually stored, right? So it gives you access to so much more stuff than you can get consciously. Because even in meditation, you are still conscious. Even in meditation, that critical factor is still there. Now, there are some kinds of meditation that do mimic some of the effects of hypnosis, but they've done things like MRI studies, functional MRI studies, and like brainwave studies where they put people in meditation. They've gone through different meditative techniques. They put them in hypnosis, and the way your brain works in those different altered mental states is very different. There are some specific things that happen when you're in hypnosis that aren't replicated in things like meditation.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I found that to be true because I've done all of them. Really, I've done meditation. I've done meditation a lot over the years, for a long time. And I also do affirmations. I teach them in the course. And I've done hypnosis as well, and hypnosis is very, very different. And apart from anything else, well, you can do guided meditations, but it takes you to a much deeper place from what I've experienced, I think.
Yeah, and plus meditation tends to be a passive process. And with hypnosis, you can get incredibly interactive. Like all of my sessions, I'm talking with the guys, we're having conversations, we're exploring memories, we're exploring beliefs. You know, there's been times when I've been arguing with clients because they got stubborn. You know, it's a situation where you can be 100% aware of everything that's going on. You can be an active participant in it while in this very altered mental state where we can make some very powerful changes very quickly.
Yeah. Jack says, I've been writing down what I'm grateful for, gratitude list, very powerful tool, and what I did well every day since Ryan said to do it. Those are two things that are really, really great mindset changes, aren't they? If you want a quick way to
it's something that something that I recommend that all my clients do, because a lot of times it's one of two things. Either they don't recognize the things that they are actually have that are good in their life right now because they're focused on all the negatives, or they're not getting themselves enough credit for what they do. So what I do is have them in the morning write down 5 things that they're grateful for, right? Your standard gratitude stuff, right? Drawing attention to things that are actually going on that are good in your life, right? But the thing that I have them do at night is write down 5 wins that they had that day, 5 things that they did right. So they're focusing on the positive successes they're actually having in their lives. Because what happens with a lot of people who are down on themselves, who have low self-esteem, who are depressed, who are kind of stuck in a negative spiral, is that they don't recognize and they don't give themselves credit for the things that are going well, that they're doing right in their lives to make positive improvements, right? They're just focusing on the fact that they haven't gotten the change that they want yet. Yeah,
indeed. I think as well, particularly at a time like this where it's been so, I mean, mental health actually just generally has been a key issue over the last year, hasn't it? And
definitely.
Just across the whole population, not just in this niche or anything like that. It's just everybody, mental health, because you can't have a bunch of restrictions and shutdowns and it not have an impact on mental health. So clearly it is affecting people, and we are not, we're not sort of removed from that just because we're guys or just because, what we've read some red pill books or whatever. Right. So I think any ways the guys can get to just find a way to look after yourself during this period. And I think actually something like writing down gratitude lists and writing down what you've done well, I think it's just those little things. It helps you to reframe how you see your life, because I think particularly at the moment it's very easy to see your life in quite despondent terms, isn't it?
Yeah, well, there's that old phrase, right, where attention goes, energy flows. And if you're always focused on the negative, then your brain says, okay, you want all the list of all the problems. Cool. So it just keeps on giving you problems. Well, if you force yourself to start paying attention to the things that are good in your life, if you force yourself to start focusing on the things you're doing right, well, then your mind is then forced to focus on the positive aspects of the things of what's going on, right? It start focusing on solutions rather than just the problems, right? If you talk about analysis paralysis, right? A lot of what happens with guys that are in that space or who have perfectionism issues is their mind is incredibly good at coming up with all the things that can go wrong. So they can't take action until they solve problems 1 through 100. And as soon as you solve problems 1 through 100, there's problems 101 through 1,000. Yeah. Because your mind has focused on all the things that go wrong. Well, if you force your mind to, for every problem it thinks of, to immediately stop and give you 2 or 3 solutions, it's like, okay, here's a problem. Cool. How do I solve that? Here's 3 solutions. Great. Okay, now you can give me the next problem. Well, if every time it gives you a problem, it then has to do 3 times more work to give you 3 solutions for it, it's going to stop bothering to give you problems because it's making more work for itself.
Yeah.
And oh, by the way, you're forcing it to give you more solutions than problems. So even in those situations, it's doing all the work to give you additional ways out of those things, right? Yeah. So it's just where you want to put your time and attention. Yeah, one of the guys asked about self-hypnosis. The only guy that I've really, there's a guy by the name of Igor Ledachowski. He's a very traditional hypnotist. He's European. I don't know what flavor. He's got a lot of hypnosis materials out there. His stuff on self-hypnosis is actually pretty good. I don't do a lot of self-hypnosis because my mind is a pain in the ass and doesn't want to let me do that. I have a really hard time helping myself. I got to hire other people to help me get past shit. It's just one of those things that's a burden I bear, right? My own little issue. Therapists tend to be difficult to help for them to help themselves because they recognize what's going on. And if their mind doesn't want us to do that stuff, it just doesn't let us. But His material is pretty good. It's very traditional hypnosis training, much more Ericksonian, some conversational hypnosis stuff as well. It's relatively affordable. So if you're looking to learn self-hypnosis, you don't want to go down the YouTube route. He's some guy that I know is legit.
Okay, that's a good tip. I put that up on the screen. Igor Ladowski for self-hypnosis. Actually, there's quite an interesting question here from Anon. So sorry if it's off topic. Why do you think in the Western world there's more unhappiness versus in poor countries where suicide and depression rates are lower? That is an interesting point, isn't it?
Because you've got time on your hands, because you're not stuck in survival mode.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the simplest thing, is that all of your basic needs are met. So if you go back to like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right, you got those like the base layer of like food, water, shelter, and then you got like fucking, you know, love and acceptance. And then after that is all the self-actualization stuff, right? Well, all that bottom layer stuff is handled in the Western world.
Yeah.
In the wealthy industrialized countries. Like, you have to work hard to be poor. You have to work hard not to be able to eat. Like, you really got to screw up. It's not easy to get by, right? To get yourself down to that level. Now, if all that stuff's handled, then your brain starts moving up the ladder, and you start looking at all these things like, okay, so what does my life mean, right? If you're trying to just make ends meet, if you're just trying to put food in your mouth at the end of the day, if you have to bust your ass 20 hours a day to do that, you don't have time, energy, and effort to care about the ultimate meaning of the universe.
Yeah.
It's also really, you know, one thing I realized growing up in the Midwest is that when you live a simple life, it's really, really easy to appreciate the simple things. Over a Saturday, we're sitting down at my uncle's ranch. It was like 65 degrees outside, 65 degrees outside, sunny. And so we're all just sitting out on the patio around a fire pit and rocking chairs, just kind of rocking back and forth, having a conversation. It's one of the best freaking times I've had in ages, because it's so easy to enjoy the simple pleasures in life if you're living a simple life. If you're in the city where everything is going 90 miles an hour, where you're comparing yourself to everybody and their brother's dog who's far more successful, far more beautiful, and living a far more exciting life than you, then it's easy to get depressed in comparison. But when everybody's living a fairly simple life, that sort of envy and jealousy isn't there as much, right? If you're in a poor country where everybody's dirt poor, you're comparing yourself to everybody else who's dirt poor, you're not coming out so bad in comparison. So you don't have that same existential angst. That'd be what I'd say that's one.
Yeah, I would co-sign that. I can't think of a better way of encapsulating it than that. It's almost like the Fight Club line, isn't it? Our war is a spiritual war, because, you know, the material, you know, we've been a few generations been very fortunate in many ways. We haven't experienced war in the same way that, you know, the previous generations did, although obviously some people have been to war, but you know what I'm saying? Like, we haven't experienced World War in that sense. Economically, generally, we've been very well off. So then you start to get into these higher realms of existential dread and existential kind of, what the hell am I doing here? What, you know, and plus as well, let's be honest. I mean, the world that we are now in, with, you know, the iPhone and the, you know, beeping going off the whole time, and messages 24/7 and likes and retweets and all this kind of stuff. It's a very, it is somewhat.
It's become so much easier to compare yourself to others.
Yeah,
it's become so much easier to compare yourself to the curated like life and the advertisement that everybody else throws up there, right? Which means it's so much easier to feel shitty in comparison, right? If you grew up in a small town where everybody's kind of like okay, and you got that one rich dude, it's okay. It's easy to compare yourself to the rich guy, but you got hundreds and hundreds of people around you that are living the same life as you are. If everybody's stuck inside and the only real access to the outside world that you have is through social media, and everything on social media is, you know, amazing vacations in Bali and the Lambos and the mansions and the freaking supermodels and the damn Bulgarian parties, right? If that's everything you're seeing and you look at your life in comparison, it's very easy to come up on the losing end of that comparison. Yeah, absolutely.
Shout out to Alfonso, who was in CAD Academy this quarter. Alfonso, good to see you, man. He says the affirmations and stuff from the CAD course has helped a shitload, to be honest, making small improvements. That is awesome to hear. I'm very, very glad to hear that, man. Keep going. You're definitely on a good path. And he's a great guy. He's really, really vocal in the webinars and so on. So I'm glad to hear that Alfonso's doing well. What else do we get here? Michael is saying that day game, how to get out of your head before approaching the girl. I keep getting into a spiral of dark thoughts.
Well, what I would say is, number one, Troy's got a number of techniques in his Cat Academy that addresses just that question. It's phenomenal material. I would say also that those spiral of dark thoughts are probably an indication that your unconscious mind doesn't want you to do that. And you might want to look at doing some work to address those underlying beliefs. And you may or may not know a guy that on this webinar that can help you do that. But fundamentally, what you need to do is just get to a point where you recognize that those thoughts are there, but you still get to choose what to do in spite of it, right? They used to say that, bravery is not a lack of fear. It's being afraid and doing it anyway.
Yeah.
Right. So a lot of times those negative thoughts are, oh, here's all the things that are going to go wrong. But those are just possibilities, right? You don't know which of those is true, if any. Yeah. The only way you can actually know is to go up and fucking do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
The other thing is, as you get those dark thoughts, if you pause and say, okay, this could go right. This could go wrong, right? Here's all the 100 things can go wrong. All right. What could go right? And paint a picture of actually succeeding and what success might look like. Then you actually created possibility in your mind for things to go well. If you're focused always on the negative and you don't look at the positive, then the only thing that you can possibly see are negative outcomes, which means that the only outcome that you've created for yourself is a negative one. Which means even if things are going well, you'll probably sabotage it and fuck it up because you're trying to drive to those negative outcomes because those are the only options you've given yourself. So you kind of have to stop, recognize what you're doing, stop, and then force yourself to create positive outcomes in your mind or positive possibility in your mind to create the opportunity to see that in the interaction and go down that road instead. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And just to add to that, I would say the other thing to do is to just do it for the story. Just do it for a laugh. Just do it because it's funny. You might think, well, I'm going to go into this interaction. It's going to be horrendous. She's going to throw a coffee all over me. Everyone's going to laugh at me. And then just think, well, so what? It's going to make a great story. I can tell everyone about it tomorrow. Almost just do it for just do it for the story, or do it because you think in your head, who else would have the balls to do this? No, who else do I know would have the balls, the brass balls to go up and do this under these circumstances? No one. So I'm just going to be that guy and I'm going to do it. And that sort of takes the onus a little bit off the central thing of like, oh, is she going to like me or not? Because it's like, well, so what? I'm doing it for a story. I'm doing it because it's funny. I'm doing it for the story. I'm doing it because I just, I can then, at the very least, I can tell everyone about it tomorrow and it's going to be really funny.
And you can take the Jocko Willing approach. Oh, she's going to throw a drink in your face. She's going to make fun of you. Everybody in the club is going to laugh. Good. Now everybody knows who you are. Now you're one step closer to finding the right girl. Now you're the one step closer to finding the girl that thought that was hilarious.
Exactly.
Right? It's just coming up with it's just all you have to do is come up with one thing that's going to be good about that interaction. Just one thing. Just one thing. If you can do that, then you create possibility for success in your head, and that's going to let you actually drive towards success.
Yeah, definitely. And Benedict has asked this a couple of times. Just banging and doing day lays can be empty. Good to have some girlfriend experiences. Is it possible to be monogamous, or are we monogamish? Well, I think we're monogamish, but that's not to say you shouldn't have a girlfriend. But what do you think?
So the example I like to use is Argentine tango. All right. In tango, they have the concept of the three dances, right? You're in a milonga, you go up, you see some girl you want to dance with, you nod, she comes over, you guys start to dance, right? Now, you two have no idea who the hell each other are. You have no idea how she moves. She has no idea how you lead. So the first dance is just an introduction, right? Just figuring out how the two of you even move, right? The second dance is whenever you start finding the boundaries. Okay. You now have an idea how you guys lead and follow. So you start testing the boundaries. How good is she? How clearly can you lead? How subtle can you be? How playful can you be? Well, by the end of the second dance, you now have you now have defined the box that you guys can play in, which means that the third dance is the first time you're actually dancing together. Because that's the place where you actually get to improvise and enjoy the experience and everything else, because you've already figured out how to talk to each other. You've already figured out the boundaries of what's possible. Now you have the space where you can just create whatever the hell you want to. And the same thing kind of happens in dating. A same day lay is very much a first dance kind of situation, right? There's only so much rapport you can build. There's only so much you can get to know somebody. There's only so far you can go. So the experience is only going to be so good. What a lot of guys in the space never give enough credit to and never really recognize is that as time goes on, as you build rapport and familiarity, and as you build, connection over time, as you build trust over time, more things become possible for both of you. Yeah. Not just in a relationship sense, even if it's just, fuck buddies for a year. Over time, sex gets better. As long as you keep that heat and passion, things get better because you open up, because you can relax more, because you trust more, because you're welcome to experiment with stuff more. You get to try more cool things. The world of possibility is greater because you built a depth of connection, right? Now, monogamy means no variety. So you're going for depth as opposed to breadth. But there's a lot of cool stuff that you can have for breadth. Now, for me, the answer is, ¿por qué no los dos? Why not both? Why not have one partner that you have your depth with, and then go have some fun on the side and get your variety? Not everybody can do that. It's not an easy solution, right? It has a fuckload of problems trying to make that happen. And oh, by the way, you got to find somebody that's going to be okay with that in one way or another. Yeah. That's not an easy task, right? You got to, as a man, you have to figure out what it is you actually need and what it is you actually want, what it is you get out of various kinds of relationships. And once you decide that, then you can start finding ways to build the relationship you want and need, build the relationship structure you want and need, right? Ryan Stone says you got to date like 20 or 30 girls to be able to find a good one. A lot of guys say you have to have 30, 40 lays before you can actually settle down and figure out what you want. And there's some truth to that, because you got to try a bunch of stuff out. You got to try a bunch of things out just to figure out what you want, what you need, what you can handle, and what you can't. I realize that swinging can be fun, may not necessarily be the best thing for me, because I hate that idea of like having to trade, right? Yeah. A lot of times you feel like you're walking in with a hot girl and it's like, okay, how am I going to barter this girl off to get what I want? And that's fucking terrible, right? Yeah. I enjoy some of the BDSM stuff. I don't want to live a BDSM lifestyle. But I had to go through that to recognize that, right? Yeah. I've done the hit it and quit it and been through several girls. I've realized that's not really what I like. I kind of take the attitude of, if it's not going to be good, then why would I bother? And if it is going to be good, then I want to stick around for a while because I'd rather have more, right? Yeah. But that's me. That's stuff that I figured out through my journey, right? So nobody can tell you one way or the other. Some people are just built for monogamy. There's this one couple that I worked with in a bar back in Kansas. Both Christian, high school sweethearts, waited until they were 18 to get married before they had sex. And they talked about how like they went on to their honeymoon down in Mexico and just like didn't leave the hotel for 5 days. It's not like they didn't know what sex was, but their first week was so amazing because they already knew each other so well. They already trusted each other so well. They already had that massive bond. So they got to do all kinds of crazy stuff from the get-go. Yeah. And I was jealous, man. I was jealous of being able to have that level and depth of connection. But maybe that's just not for me. Maybe I need some of that and some of something else, right? Yeah. So every guy's can be different. And the thing is that monogamy is just as complicated as non-monogamy. Non-monogamy is not an easy thing. Playing the hit it and quit it lifestyle is not an easy thing. It leaves you empty in some very important ways, right? All the guys that are really, all the guys in the space, like Troy has been in a relationship with a girl for a while. Ryan Stone is married. Rich Cooper has been in a relationship with his girl for several years. Rollo Tomasi is freaking married for 20 plus years. Even John has Miss MLD, who's been around for several years. So even guys who are in the space, being a heavy duty player, still maintain long-term relationships because there's things from that you just can't replicate in any other way.
Yeah, and there's trade-offs whichever way you decide to go, basically. And by the way, I say decide to go. I mean, it's not a lifelong thing. I mean, you may decide as a younger guy that you want to be, playing the field promiscuous, and a lot of guys do that. And then as you maybe you get older, you decide that you want to be in a relationship for a while, and then maybe that changes, right? I mean, this is fluid. It's not that there's a sort of an end goal. You have to decide one or the other, and that's it. Exactly.
The thing is that the guys think that once they've made a decision that they have to stick with it for the rest of their lives, so that's who they are forever. And the point of being in the space is to change who you are from where you were to where you want to be. Yeah. Well, that's going to change over time, right?
And it's what works for you at a particular time in your life, isn't it? There's a final question here from Benedict. He says, what are your thoughts on IEMT? Is it effective? I'm not sure.
I'm not sure what. Yeah, me neither. Integral eye movement therapy. I'm not familiar with it. It sounds kind of like EMDR, eye motion desensitization and reprogramming, which is a therapeutic technique which uses lights plus sound to kind of entrain your left and right hemisphere of your brain in different ways. It's phenomenal for anxiety and PTSD. It's incredibly effective. I am not an EMDR practitioner, but actually Paul from Apex Mindset is. Oh, he's a special forces guy, and he actually used that to get over PTSD and some other stuff as well. That's so if he recommends it, if he gives it the thumbs up, then that's enough for me. I'm not sure how IMT and EMDR differ, but that's what I'd say on that one.
That's interesting. Well, Benedict, it might be worth heading over to Paul's Apex Mindset channel and hitting him up, asking him if he knows about it, because he might be able to give a more, maybe he does, and he'd be able to give his view on it. That could be really interesting. But yeah, anyway, with that being said, thanks everybody for all the questions. Ryan, it's been awesome having you on, mate. As always, it's always great to talk to you. You bring this really considered approach to this space, which I think is needed sometimes and is a breath of fresh air. And it's always great to have you on. Hopefully we'll get to do another show very soon. What we haven't really talked much about is the BDSM and the swinging side of things. And perhaps we do
degeneracy.
Yeah. So perhaps we do a follow-up and we do like the degeneracy show, because I've obviously explored those areas as well. So it'd be really great to get your take on those things.
That'd be awesome.
Yeah, but for the time being, just signing off. Anything you'd like to tell the guys what you got coming up? We've already told them where to find you. I'll put the website in the chat again. But any final thoughts or things that you want to alert the guys to?
Sure. First of all, thank you so much, Troy, for having me on. It's always a pleasure to talk. I love being able to sit down and just shoot the shit about all kinds of mindset stuff. And you've done phenomenal work in that space in terms of integrating that into your CAD Academy course. And you should bring that out again soon, because it's really good stuff. The other thing I would say is you can find me at www.hypnosisformen.net. I've got my YouTube channel linked below as well. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at hypnosisformen. Over 2021, I'm going to be coming out with a lot more material in terms of recorded stuff. I'm going to try and build out some courses to kind of help guys work their own way through some of these various issues. So if you have any ideas of things that you want me to address, either in a video, either in a course, just hit me up at ryan@hypnosisformen.net. That's my email address. You can DM me on Twitter or Instagram as well. That works just fine too. You can, of course, always book a call or a session on my website, and I look forward to working with anybody who wants to make their lives better.
Excellent. I just put the email into the Ryan@hypnosisformen.net. Yes, absolutely. So hit Ryan up there. And from me, well, tomorrow we've got Mr. Sterling Cooper on the channel, which is very exciting stuff, because last time I had him on, that video got about 50,000 views. It was probably the most viewed video that I've done. And it's going to be great to have Sterling on. He's going to be talking about his sexual dominance course, which is really interesting in itself. Absolutely. And also, Sterling's been at the center of a bit of controversy in the last few days as well, lining up some of his porn star co-workers. So it's going to be kind of interesting to get his take on what's been happening.
That's going to be a phenomenal episode. I'm really looking forward to that one. Sterling Cooper's an amazing guy. His course looks unbelievable. It does. I'm definitely going to be signing up myself. So
yeah, it does look fantastic. So I'm looking forward to that tomorrow. That's 11:30 a.m. EST, 4:30 p.m. GMT. So yeah, join me for that. Hit subscribe. Give me a like. Give us a comment beneath. Anything to tickle the algo. Really helpful to broaden the subscriber base, get more people on board, etc., etc. But anyway, Ryan, thanks ever so much for joining me. It's been fantastic as always, and we.